Well, hello. This is the story of Sam and Bernard and Jaggedy Mountain. Now, this story begins very, very early one Sunday morning. It's the height of summer, and the sun creeps up over the mountains very, very early in the morning. But as soon as those first sparkles of light come into Sam's bedroom, bang, he's awake. And of course, as usual, he tiptoes into Bernard's room and he says, "Bernard, are you awake?" Bernard goes, And of course, any normal child at that point would say, "Well, he's not really awake, I'll go back and play in my room." But Sam, being Sam, said, "No, I'll try again. Bernard, are you awake?" And Bernard, by this time, was nearly awake. So he said, "Yeah, all right, I'm awake." Sam said, "I want to go on an adventure today." And Bernard rolled over and said, "No." Sam said, "I want to go on an adventure today." And he shook Bernard. And after a while, Sam explained his plan to Bernard. Sam wanted to do something actually not so much as an adventure, but as a bit of, well, shall we say, just a little bit of tiny naughtiness. Sam had been eyeing off a mountain over the back of the northeast ridge on their property for a long time. And that mountain was called Jaggedy Mountain. It was called Jaggedy Mountain because the rocks at the top were like that. They were quite sharp and they went up and down. Very, very rugged. And Sam and Bernard's mum and dad had said, never, never, never go up Jaggedy Mountain. So you can see why it was kind of naughty. So they slipped on their boots, they got some food together, put it in a pack, and they were just sneaking out the back door when they heard a little mouse kind of noise over the back linoleum. Linoleum is a covering that was used in old-fashioned times for the floor. And who was it but Jane, their little sister, who had just turned 5. Sam groaned inwardly. Oh. Bernard went, "Oh," because they knew that there's just no way known that they could shake Jane from their tail. Once she got an idea in her mind that she wanted to do something with her beautiful big brothers, that was it. She did. So on that day, most reluctantly, Sam and Bernard said, "All right, Jane, you can come along. You can come along." So out they went, through the back vegetable patch, down the back paddock, then they cut across through a small blackberry patch to the northeast ridge. After about half an hour, they were on this northeast ridge, and that was as far as they'd ever been before in their lives. But Sam, of course, being a young bushman, very confident that he knew the way, very confident, in fact, that he knew everything. So it was barely 6:30, and they were walking through beautiful, open, dry eucalypt forest, making great time for Jaggedy Mountain. Within another hour, they were at the base of Jaggedy Mountain. Can you believe it? Miles away it was. But they were walking very strongly that day. And even Jane, who normally dawdled, something chronic, she made it with them. So then the ground started rising, gently at first, and then steeper, until the trees gave way to scrungy, scrawny little scrubs. And it was getting very rocky, and there was moss up there, and it was a little bit colder. And soon they were climbing hand over hand. And they got up to an area of scree slope, where it was just rocks, and it was quite steep, and they had to be very careful. But they knew about climbing on rocks, and they helped Jane. They were good brothers. And then they got nearly to the top. Nearly at the top, there was this rock going that way, then another rock going that way, and in the middle, there was this kind of bit of a chasm, bit of a gap. Bernard got across it, Sam got across it, and then they turned around to help Jane get across it, and she fell. Now, thankfully, she didn't fall far, but she fell far enough down that gap and got herself wedged, started crying, that they were in a real pickle. So, what do? You're stuck up a mountain with your little sister wedged between two rocks. You're not meant to be there. It's 9 o'clock in the morning. You've got no rope. You're in trouble. So Sam looked at Bernard. Oh. Bernard looked at Sam. Oh no. I knew that things were not good. So Bernard fortunately took charge. And he said, Sam, you're the fastest and the quickest. You just lickety-split down that mountain. You get Dad. He'll be down in the milking shed. Get some rope. And you get him back up this mountain. And we'll rescue Jane from the clutches of Jaggedy Mountain. So that's what Sam did. He flew down that mountain, round trees, from rock to rock. He was so fast that he ran past a wallaby. Luckily, he didn't see any snakes, but he was so quick. Within about an hour, he was back down with Dad. And sure as eggs, Dad was in the milking shed. So Sam rushed into the milking shed, shook his dad on the shoulder, say, Dad, 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 we've had a bit of an accident. And Sam's dad just straight away said, yep, we'll go and rescue Jane. So he put some rope in his pack, got some food and a hot thermos of tea. Mum made some sandwiches wrapped in stuff called grease-proof paper. It was a thick, crinkly old paper that you wrapped your sandwiches in. And off they went, Sam and Dad, up Jaggedy Mountain. Sam could show Dad exactly where they went. So they made very good time coming up. And by about 11 o'clock, Dad and Sam had made it back. Now, you might think they might find Jane there crying and Bernard wringing his hands and all worried and distraught. But no, in fact, Jane was singing a little song, some nursery rhymes, and Bernard was throwing rocks off the top of the mountain. He'd climbed to the top of the mountain a few feet away and was merrily throwing rocks over the side. Sam was not impressed. He understood the gravity of the situation, and both his sister, who was trapped, and Bernard clearly didn't. So Sam was not impressed. However, there were more pressing matters. So Dad reassured Jane a bit more, who was very happy to see her dad, and lowered the rope with Bernard on it down into the crack. So he wrapped the rope round Bernard's waist and he lowered Bernard down. Bernard got down there, wrapped the rope round Jane's waist, and Dad pulled him up. It wasn't far. Jane had luckily only a few scratches on her, and she was happy as right as rain. Jane was a bit of a nuisance to Bernard and Sam, but she was actually pretty tough. Then they all gathered up their things, had a bite to eat before they left, and headed off down the mountain. They made it back about 2 o'clock that afternoon. Jane was fairly slow, and Sam and Bernard's mum gave him a big hug, and Jane got a big hug. But unfortunately, I think you can guess what happened to Sam and Bernard. Sam and Bernard got a serious telling off. They knew what they'd done was wrong. They got sent down to do some chores down in the shed, chop some wood, get the kindling in, clean out the cow shed. And then they came back at 5 o'clock. It was still sunny and hot. And Mum and Dad said, I'm sorry, Sam and Bernard, but you have to have punishment. So they got sent to bed with no supper. Sam and Bernard weren't impressed, but they knew they'd done the wrong thing. And a severe telling off. Not good. Even Sam had a little bit of a cry. His mum and dad were so angry with him. But do you know, later that night, while Sam and Bernard were asleep, their dad sneaked up into their bedrooms, sat down beside them, while they were sleeping, gave them a big hug, and thanked God that they were just safe. And he may have even shed a tiny little tear. And that's the story of Sam and Bernard, and some people say it should be Sam and Bernard and Jane, and Jaggedy Mountain. but I prefer just Sam and Bernard in Jaggedy Mountain. No offence, Jay.